The bills have landed, and they confirm what millions already know. The cost of living in Britain is not easing. It is compounding. Energy prices rose on the 1st of January 2026. The Ofgem energy price cap increased by £3 annually, pushing the typical household bill to £1,758. That is a 0.2% rise from the previous quarter. Small, the government says. Marginal, energy suppliers insist. But for families already stretched thin, it is another line item they cannot afford. And energy is just the beginning. Water bills surged by an average of £123, or 26% from April 2025, bringing the national average to £603 annually. That is £10 more per month. Council tax bills climbed by up to 5% in most English local authorities, adding £109 to the average band D property. Broadband and mobile providers, including BT, Virgin Media, EE, and 3, have announced price hikes of up to £48 annually, kicking in from March and April 2026. Mortgage holders are bracing for thousands of pounds in additional costs as fixed-rate deals expire and borrowers remortgage at higher rates. This is not inflation settling. This is a system extracting more from households that have nothing left to give. Here is what the numbers reveal. Between energy, water, council tax, broadband, and mortgage increases, the average UK household is facing an additional £660 in annual costs in 2026. That figure does not account for food inflation, transport costs, or childcare. It is purely the essential bills required to keep the lights on, water running, internet connected, and council services funded. For middle-income households, the squeeze is relentless. They earn too much to qualify for targeted support, but not enough to absorb consecutive price hikes without cutting back. Lower-income families face an even harsher reality. 6 million households in the UK are currently in fuel poverty, unable to afford adequate heating. A further 9 million are struggling to pay energy bills following the fossil fuel price shock that began in 2021 and has never fully receded. The fuel poverty gap, the amount low-income households fall short of affording adequate energy, has nearly doubled since 2020. It now stands at over £400 annually. That means millions of people are not just struggling, they are failing to heat their homes properly, failing to cook hot meals daily, failing to keep their children warm in winter. And the government's response? A £3 annual increase to energy bills justified by inflation adjustments and standing charge recalibrations. The timeline of this crisis is brutal. In 2021, the energy price cap was under £1,300. By 2022, it had surged past £1,900. It peaked in 2023 at over £2,000 before settling into the £1,700 to £1,800 range. Prices never returned to pre-crisis levels. They plateaued at a rate that has become normalized as the new baseline. The public was told to endure the spike. They did. They were told prices would fall. They did not. Now they are told to accept gradual increases as inevitable. Water bill increases follow a similar pattern. Ofgem, the water regulator, approved a £157 average increase over 5 years, a 36% rise, to fund infrastructure improvements. Thames Water customers will see their combined water and sewerage bills jump from £435 to £543 between 2024 and 2026. Southern Water, Severn Trent, and Anglian Water customers face comparable hikes. The justification? Decades of underinvestment, failing infrastructure, and sewage discharge scandals that require urgent capital spending. The burden? Passed entirely to consumers. Council tax follows the same logic. Local authorities, starved of central government funding and struggling with rising social care costs, have maxed out their permitted increases. Birmingham, Bradford, Newham, and other councils facing effective bankruptcy have been granted permission to raise rates beyond the 5% cap. Some households face increases of up to 10%. The services they receive in return? Diminished bin collections, closed libraries, reduced youth services, and crumbling roads. Broadband and mobile price rises add insult to injury. Providers argue that network upgrades and inflation justify annual increases. BT, EE, Virgin Media, Sky, Vodafone, and O2 have all announced hikes for 2026. Virgin Media customers face £4 monthly increases. BT and EE customers see rises linked to CPI inflation plus 3.9%, adding up to £48 annually for some. 3 and Vodafone customers face similar adjustments. These are not luxury services. Broadband is essential for work, education, healthcare access, and social connection. Mobile phones are lifelines, yet providers treat them as revenue streams to be maximized. Mortgage costs present the most acute pressure for homeowners. Approximately 69,000 households are seeing fixed-rate deals expire in January 2026, forcing them to remortgage at significantly higher rates. The average increase for affected borrowers is £3,852 annually. That is over £300 per month. For families who budgeted based on ultra-low rates secured during the pandemic, this is catastrophic. Many will be forced to cut spending drastically. Some will default. A small but growing number will lose their homes. The Bank of England cut the base rate to 3.75% in December 2025, the lowest in almost 3 years. But mortgage rates have not fallen proportionally. Lenders remain cautious, maintaining margins and pricing in economic uncertainty. The result? Homeowners receive minimal relief while banks protect profitability. Political pressure is intensifying, but the response remains inadequate. Labor won the 2024 general election, promising to ease the cost of living crisis. Yet net approval of the government's handling of the issue has fallen to its lowest level since tracking began in October 2022. In a January 2026 YouGov poll, 44% of Britons reported struggling to pay for food in the past 3 months. 37% said they had difficulty affording other essential bills. This is not marginal hardship. This is mainstream poverty creeping into middle-class households. The government's defense rests on benefits uprating and targeted support. From April 2026, universal credit claimants will receive a 6.2% income boost above inflation. That is welcome, but it does not address the structural problem. Essential household bills are rising faster than wages and benefits combined. Even with uprating, millions will fall further behind. The Warm Home Discount Scheme has been expanded to cover 2.7 million more households, adding 2p per day to standing charges for all energy customers. That is a cross-subsidy mechanism where bill payers fund support for the poorest. It helps those in deepest need, but increases costs for everyone else. Conservative opposition MPs have seized on the issue, accusing Labour of failing to deliver on promises. But they offer no credible alternative. Their tenure saw austerity cuts that devastated local authority budgets, deregulation that enabled water company profiteering, and energy policy failures that left the UK overly reliant on gas. Both major parties have presided over a system that prioritizes corporate interests over household affordability. The historical comparison is damning. In the early 2000s, household bills were a manageable portion of income. Energy, water, and council tax combined rarely exceeded 10% of household budgets for most families. By 2026, that figure has doubled or tripled for many. Fuel poverty, once a marginal issue affecting the elderly and unemployed, now afflicts 6 million households, including working families. The fuel poverty rate in England is 11%, in Scotland 34%, in Wales 14%, and in Northern Ireland 24%. These are not isolated pockets. These are entire regions where energy costs have become unaffordable. Compare this to other developed nations. France has maintained lower energy costs through state intervention and nuclear investment. Germany has faced similar price spikes, but deployed more aggressive social tariffs. The UK, by contrast, has relied on market mechanisms and limited subsidies. The result? Higher bills, greater inequality, and deeper poverty. Experts and charities have called for a social tariff for energy, a permanent mechanism to shield low-income households from price volatility. Research suggests this could lift millions out of fuel poverty. The government has resisted, citing cost and complexity. Meanwhile, energy companies report billions in profits. Water firms pay dividends to shareholders despite service failures, and broadband providers raise prices while their networks struggle with capacity. The consequences extend far beyond individual hardship. rising household bills are suppressing economic growth. Consumer spending, which drives 60% of UK GDP, remains weak. Families are cutting discretionary spending on hospitality, retail, and leisure. Small businesses in these sectors are closing. Job growth is stagnant. Productivity stalls when workers are cold, undernourished, and stressed about bills. Child poverty is rising. Families are choosing between heating and eating. Schools report increased numbers of children arriving hungry, unable to concentrate. NHS data shows a spike in respiratory illnesses linked to cold, damp housing. Mental health services are overwhelmed by cases rooted in financial stress. This is a public health crisis driven by economic policy failure. Regional inequality is worsening. London and the Southeast, where incomes are higher, can absorb bill increases more easily. The North, Midlands, Wales, and Scotland, where wages are lower and housing stock is older and less energy efficient, suffer disproportionately. The levelling up agenda, promised by Conservatives and adopted by Labour, rings hollow when household bills are pushing entire communities into poverty. Political volatility is inevitable. When mainstream parties fail to address fundamental issues, voters turn elsewhere. Populist movements gain traction. Trust in democratic institutions erodes. The cost of living crisis is not just an economic issue. It is a democratic threat. The short-term political fallout is already visible. Labour's approval ratings on economic competence have declined. Backbench MPs are receiving constituent complaints at levels not seen since the pandemic. Local elections in May 2026 will test public patience. If Labour loses seats, particularly in areas hit hardest by bill increases, pressure for policy change will intensify. But change requires political courage the current government has not demonstrated. The long-term implications are even more concerning. If household bills continue rising faster than incomes, a generation will grow up in energy poverty, food insecurity, and housing instability. Social mobility will collapse. Health outcomes will worsen. Crime rates, particularly theft and fraud driven by desperation, will rise. Community cohesion will fracture as people compete for scarce resources and limited support. The economic model is broken. Essential services, water, energy, broadband, have been privatized and financialized. Profits are extracted. Investment is deferred. Costs are socialized onto consumers. Regulators, Ofgem, Ofgem, are captured by the industries they oversee. They approve price rises, accept justifications, and impose token penalties for failures. The public pays more and receives less. And here is what makes this moment particularly enraging. The UK is generating record levels of renewable energy. Wind and solar capacity has expanded dramatically, yet household bills remain high. Why? Because the energy market is still priced based on gas. When gas prices spike, electricity prices follow, even when the electrons come from wind turbines. This is a regulatory failure. The government has pledged to reform the market, but has not delivered. Meanwhile, households pay inflated prices for green energy because the system protects gas profitability. Water companies operate monopolies. Customers cannot switch providers. Yet firms like Thames Water, drowning in debt after years of dividend extraction and underinvestment, are raising bills to fund bailouts. Customers are forced to pay for corporate mismanagement. There is no accountability, no alternative, no escape. Council tax is regressive. It is based on property values from 1991. A mansion in Mayfair pays proportionally less than a terraced house in Burnley. Revaluation has been politically impossible for decades. So the burden falls disproportionately on those least able to afford it. Local authorities, meanwhile, are trapped. They cannot raise enough revenue to fund services, yet they are blamed for cuts. This is the reality the new figures confirm. UK household bills are not stabilizing. They are rising relentlessly across every essential category: energy, water, council tax, broadband, mortgages. The cumulative impact is crushing. Middle-income families are being squeezed into precarity. Low-income families are being pushed into destitution. And the government's response is to announce marginal support measures, express sympathy, and insist the market will eventually correct. It will not. Markets do not correct when monopolies control supply, regulators are captured, and political will is absent. This requires intervention. It requires social tariffs for energy and water. It requires council tax reform. It requires broadband regulation that prioritizes affordability. It requires mortgage support for households facing payment shocks. It requires a government willing to confront vested interests and restructure broken systems. The public knows this. They see through the rhetoric. They recognize the failure. And they are furious, not just at rising bills, but at the indifference of those in power, at the sense that their struggles are considered acceptable collateral damage in an economy designed to benefit shareholders, not citizens. The figures are out. The bills are rising. The question is how long the government believes it can manage this crisis without fundamental change. Because the patience of ordinary people is not infinite. And when it runs out, the political consequences will be far more severe than a few percentage points of inflation or a marginal drop in approval ratings. The cost of living crisis is a legitimacy crisis, and it is accelerating.